morning, everybody. It's really lovely to be down here in Rotorua. We haven't spent a lot of time here, but it's really nice to be here. So thank you for having me. And thanks to Simon for your introduction and your introduction to a few of my siblings. That was good. Most people in the Grace churches of New Zealand know one of the McGimpseys, at least. Because there are quite a lot of us, actually, and if he was to introduce all of my brothers and sisters, it would take a long time. But I have 6 sisters and 5 brothers. I'm one of 12. This is a whole lot of us. And so growing up, we often got along quite well. We often played games together and things like that and got along. But there was also a lot of disagreements and a lot of tension, as I'm sure you can imagine with 12 of us. There's always someone that you're fighting with at that time. But this morning, I'd like to talk to you about this parable. And the main idea of this parable is that Jesus is not just a gift giver. He is an investor, and he is invested in each one of us. And the reason I bring up my family is because I'm sure many of you can attest to the fact that if you loan money to family, you know very well the difference between a gift and an investment. If you loan money to family, what you thought may have been an investment will turn out to be a gift. You're not likely to get that money back. As we've learned. In my family, we've all taken turns being the family bank and going and getting a loan from the family bank. But the interest rates are not very high, so it's not very much fun being the family bank. Anyway, I'd like to talk about the difference between a gift and an investment. See, we talk a lot about things being gifts, even life itself. We talk about having the gift of life. Children are born and they are a gift. They have the gift of life. But life is not simply a gift. Life is an investment. Jesus has invested in each one of us. And we speak of the gift of redemption. When Jesus died on the cross for us, he gave us the gift of being set free. But we forget that word redemption means to be bought back at a price. And so we no longer belong to someone else, but Jesus has invested in us. He's made us his own for a purpose. And we even speak about our gifts. When we're talking about our talents, we talk about our gifts, our abilities. We call them gifts. But Jesus has given them to us as well as investments, things that he has given us to do his work. That's what this morning's parable is about. Jesus has shared with us his wealth in order to do his work. He is not simply a gift giver, he is an investor. So we're going to look at the parable this morning and see that, and also see how in believing that, we can live a more meaningful life, I believe. So let's pray, and we'll get into it. Lord, I thank you for your kindness to us. I thank you for the mercy that you have shown us. And Lord, I pray that we would show kindness and mercy to other people as well. Lord, I thank you for your word. I thank you that you give it to us to get to know you better and to learn from it. So God, I pray that the Holy Spirit would be with us this morning, helping us to understand and helping us to apply this word to our lives, so that we might not just go away having heard blank and empty words, but that as we read before, that your word doesn't return to you empty, that it would bring us closer to you, that it would spur us on to love one another towards love and good works. And I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so I'd like to make 3 observations from this parable. to show that Jesus is an investor in each one of our lives. And the first one is this. If we read the first two verses again, it says, "Again, it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted his wealth to them. To one he gave 5 bags of gold, or talents, to another 2 talents, and to another 1 talent, each according to his ability. Then he went on his journey." And so the first thing I'd like to see is Jesus has invested his wealth differently, each according to his ability. When the man in the parable went away, he entrusted his wealth to 3 of his servants, and his wealth makes up 8 talents altogether. But the master makes no attempt to share out the talents in a way that we might consider fair. It's not equal. He doesn't give them all 2 and a bit each, 2 and 2/3. He gives 1 5. He gives 1 2, and he gives just one talent. He distributes his wealth differently. He makes no attempt to split them fairly. Why is this? And it's because it's an investment. It's not just a gift. Does anybody here remember the Saturday Colgate feature? So a long time ago, when I was younger, we used to look forward every week to the Saturday Colgate feature. It was just a movie that they showed, I think, on Channel 2 every Saturday. And it was a family movie, like Beethoven or something like that, a family-friendly movie. But we used to watch it together as a family. And we used to really look forward to watching a movie, partly because we enjoyed watching movies together, but also because we would often get treats with the Saturday Colgate feature. Mum would get us a big bag of popcorn to share, or she would give us a bag of lollies to share, and we'd all look forward to that. But I can't imagine the kind of riot there would have been if Mum had taken out the bag of lollies and she had said to my older siblings, "You're a bit older, you have bigger stomachs, you can have more of the lollies." Or she said to one of the younger ones, because you are small, you can't have as many lollies as your older siblings. I can't imagine how much of a riot there would have been. Why? Because it was a gift, and a gift of lollies we tend to share out equally. My mum would open the bag of lollies and she'd count each one of them out equally so that we all got the same amount. It wasn't distributed on ability because it was a gift. It was simply a gift and something that we all enjoyed. But you don't do that with investments. Can you imagine if you were going to invest, some in, Apple or Microsoft, and you're going to invest some in your cousin's pet costume company? You wouldn't invest the same amount in each, trying to be fair. You wouldn't say the fair thing to do is to give Apple and my cousin's pet costume company the same amount of money. That's not how investments work. No, you look at what will produce the most profit. You look at each one's ability to produce the most profit, and you give that one more money, and you give the other less. That's how investments work, not gifts. And so the question is this how Jesus has distributed his wealth? How has Jesus distributed his wealth? When we think about our gifts, our talents, our abilities, when we look at other people, has Jesus distributed his gifts, his abilities, his time, the time that we each have, We don't have the same amount of time. We don't have the same amount of wealth. We don't have the same amount of abilities. Jesus hasn't distributed those things in a way that we might consider fair. And for a lot of you, it might seem very unfair. You might look around and you might see people who are great at doing things that you wish you were good at. You might see people who have a lot of wealth. You might be jealous of their wealth. Or you might see a lot of people with a lot of free time. You might be jealous of their free time. But Jesus has distributed his wealth according to each one's ability. And the problem with that is some of us can look at ourselves and see nothing worthwhile. Some of us can look at others and see how that person could be good for the kingdom of God, but not how I could be good for the kingdom of God. I remember one time I was living in Dunedin and I was struggling with this a lot. I could look around and I could see that people were blessed with amazing abilities. Some people were great at talking to people, to making relationships and conversations, and bringing people along to the Bible study or to church or whatever it was. And other people were really good at speaking or at preaching. We had some really good preachers down there. And we can tend to be jealous. But Jesus has distributed things according to each person's ability. And so we shouldn't see him as unfair. We shouldn't see him as unkind, but as a wise investor. And we should make the most of what he has given us. Put what he has given you to work. The problem with jealousy is that you forget that you yourself have something to offer and you don't put it to work. You become like the single talent servant and don't do anything with what Jesus has given us. We might not be returning as big a profit as other people, but if we focus on that, you won't return a profit at all. So take up your responsibilities. Take out what Jesus has given you to do. Maybe you can't lead a church, but you can lead your family. Maybe you can't donate thousands and thousands of dollars to various charities that you wish you could. But you can donate 10 or 100. Start with what you have. And then, as we'll see later, maybe Jesus will give you more. But the second important observation, and one that speaks to the jealousy we often feel, is that Jesus has invested in each person abundantly. It's not as though he gave the servant who got 1 talent, it's not as though he gave him nothing. Even though 1 talent is the smallest amount, it's not a small amount. While I was trying to understand this passage, there were a few figures that came up as to what that 1 talent would be worth in today's money. And the idea is that it would be worth something between $600,000 and $1 million. This is no small investment. Even though he got less than the others, it was not a small amount. It was not a small investment. It was a huge responsibility. Can you imagine being handed $600,000 to invest with? It's a big responsibility. It's a big amount. Jesus has invested in all of us abundantly. And again, this suggests that it's not just a gift. That it's not. We tend to give gifts that are smaller than enough to buy a house, even in Auckland. We give smaller gifts to help people get by. This is much more than a gift. It is a great responsibility. On the other hand, investments do tend to be large amounts. Investments. There's the classic saying, if you want to earn money, you've got to spend money. You've got to spend money to make money. The master here is giving his servant more than most people would see in their lifetimes. He's entrusting this responsibility to his servant. And though it may not be as much as the others, it is huge. And that's important for us to remember as well. How many of us get caught up in looking around at other people and fail to see the huge amount that God has given you to work with? How many of us look around at the wealth of other people and fail to see the vast wealth that each one of us has within ourselves that Jesus has given us to do his work? Has Jesus been stingy with you? Of course he hasn't. Even though you may not have as many talents as others, you may not be as smart or as rich, God has given you enough to make as big an impact as you can imagine. How many stories have you heard about people who put what little they seem to have to work? There's a story of a lady that really helped me. I've had a lot of health issues over the years, and my brother gave me a book from a lady named Joni Erickson Tyler. Have any of you heard of her before? Yeah. So at 17, she thought that God had taken away everything. She was in a diving accident and she became unable to use her arms and legs. It seemed as though God had taken everything from her, but in fact she was able to learn to paint, and she was able to use word recognition software, speaking, to write books, and she wrote this book that my brother gave me, When God Weeps. And it's changed my life more than any other books, probably, apart from this one. It spoke to my life when I really needed it. God used someone who thought that God had taken away everything, who thought she had very little to do great and amazing things. And the same thing is true for each one of us. Instead of looking around and seeing that other people have more than we have, we should thank God for what he has given us and take up that responsibility and go and spend that money that he has given us to spend. Jesus has invested in each one of us abundantly. But the third and most clear observation that shows us that Jesus is an investor is the story he tells us, and the key difference he shows in the two ways that he responds to the servant who doesn't do anything and the two that do. And that key difference, which I alluded to before when I talked about the difference between gift and investment in family, is that Jesus expects returns on his investment. Jesus expects returns on his investment appropriate to what each person has received. You see this in the way that he responds to his servants. I'll start with the one-talent servant, the lazy servant, because the response to the other two is much better, so I'll save that for last. But the servant who receives 1 talent, he doesn't put his master's money to work. It says he takes it away and he buries it. And when he faces up to the master says, he comes to settle accounts, and he says the reason why he went and buried that money instead of doing things with it. And the reason he says is that he thought the master is a hard man, harvesting where he has not sown and gathering where he has not scattered seed. What does that mean? Basically, what the servant is saying is that the master, rather than being a kind investor who has entrusted this responsibility with someone who he believes in, rather than seeing the master as a kind investor, he sees him as someone who takes what doesn't belong to him and who doesn't do anything to earn what he has. So rather than taking his wealth to do his work, the servant buries it and does nothing with it. He believes the master takes what doesn't belong to him and doesn't do any work. Now, this might seem like a terrible thing for the servant to believe, but it's actually, I think, remarkably smart, and it's very accurate. I think it accurately portrays the attitude of this servant, and it accurately portrays an attitude that we can often have ourselves. How many times have you thought of God, maybe not explicitly, but how many times have you felt about God that he's someone who takes what doesn't belong to him? Maybe you haven't thought it as clearly and as explicitly as the servant has, but how many times have you thought things like, it's my time. I can do whatever I want with my time. Or it's my money. It's mine. Why should someone else get any of it? Why should someone else benefit from my profits? Or perhaps I worked very hard to get good at this. Why shouldn't I be the one to benefit from it? This attitude is why I think we need sometimes to see Jesus as an investor and not simply a gift giver. Because this attitude can come from seeing everything as simply a gift. Let me explain. To explain, I'd like to illustrate. Has anybody here ever seen or read Harry Potter? Any of the books? There's a couple of hands. Alright. Now, while some of you may not have seen it or heard of it, there is a character in there which I think you could picture being a real person, but he's a horrible character, and his name is Dudley. Now, Dudley is Harry's cousin, and his parents are Harry's aunt and uncle, who Harry lives with. And in the first movie, it's Dudley's birthday. Okay, it's his birthday, and he comes down, and his mother has been busy cooking him breakfast, which Harry has to take over when he arrives. They're cooking Dudley breakfast, and they have plans to take him off to the zoo later. But first, he comes down to find that the lounge is absolutely full with presents. There's big boxes all tied up and wrapped up nicely. There's little boxes, and they all look beautifully wrapped. And they fill up the lounge. There are heaps of them, a huge big pile. And do you know what the first thing he says to his parents is? Now, what you want to hear from a child who's just been given a lot of gifts is, "Oh, thank you, Mum. Thank you, Dad. That is very kind." But that's not what Dudley says. Dudley looks, he's a spoiled brat, and he says, "I'm a father," to his father. And his father says, 36, I counted them myself. And at this point, Dudley says, 36! But last year I had 37! And he gets angry and upset with his parents as if they had stolen from him. Even though he'd only got one less. He speaks as if his parents had stolen from him, and it's absurd, but that's often our attitude as well towards God. Even though we say these things are gifts, the gift of life, the gift of redemption, our gifts. Think of them as gifts, and that is good, but sometimes we can have that attitude that when Jesus tells us that we should be using these things for other people, we feel as if something has been taken from us. When Jesus encourages us to spend our time serving other people, we feel as if our time is being stolen from us. And we should be able to do with it what we want. And when Jesus encourages us to be generous with our money, to the rich young ruler, he even told him to sell everything he had and give to the poor. Something in us can't stand that thought because it's our money. We worked hard to earn it. Why should other people benefit from it? And yet we still say to ourselves, we thank God for giving us those things as gifts. We're behaving just like Dudley, acting as if something that has been freely given is being stolen from us. So we can have that. And so Jesus points out that this lazy and wicked servant, while he thought he was doing the bare minimum, was actually preventing even the smallest profit coming back to the investor. So while this person thought that he could just bury the money, the master says to him, why didn't you put it on with the bankers? Then he would have received some small amount back. But this servant refused to give the master any profit from what he had given him. He didn't receive a cent back from his $600,000 investment. And understandably, the result for this servant is misery. Not only does he get thrown outside into the darkness, but the talent that he was given is given to someone else. And that's often how it can be with us. If we refuse the responsibilities that Jesus has given us, that he has invested in us, then our lives will end in misery as well, cast out ultimately from the presence of God. But not only that, but if we don't take up that responsibility, even if it's a small amount of responsibility that he has given us, Jesus will give it to someone else. Jesus' work will still be done. Jesus still does his work, but through someone else. See, Jesus expects returns on his investments. And so instead of being like the single talent servant, we should be like the other servants. We ought to be like the other servants. And what did they do? They took the wealth that the master had given them, and they quickly went away and put it to work. And when the master returned, they presented it to him. They presented their profits to him. And they appear to have kept nothing for themselves. They offered him everything that they had. And how does the master react? Well, firstly, interestingly, he responds to both exactly the same, which I think is very encouraging. He responds exactly the same way to the person who brought back 10 talents as he does to the person who brought back 4. Even though one only had 40% of the profits that the other one did in total, Jesus reacts to him exactly the same because he was faithful with what he had been given. And I think that's very encouraging. But how does he respond? Each servant is given 3 things. 1, he's given praise from the master. Number 2, he's given further responsibility. And 3, he's given eternal joy. And this is the glory of being faithful with what Jesus has invested in us. This is the glory of being faithful to what Jesus has given us to do his work. First of all, the glory of praise. How many of us look for praise in the people around us? How many, when we do something that we think is pretty cool, we want to tell people so that they say, that is pretty cool, so that they can praise us, so that they can tell us that we've done a good job. We love it when people praise us. Kids love it when they're praised by their parents. And so they say to their parents all the time, watch me do this, so that you can encourage them. Jesus has made us to love praise, but here, Jesus invites us Jesus invites us to imagine not just getting praise from those who are around us, but from the Master himself. Jesus himself, the Son of God. Praise from him, the great investor. He invites us to imagine seeing himself face to face, presenting him with whatever little we have managed to do, and hearing that wonderful phrase, "Well done, good and faithful servant. Well done." But more than that, Jesus also invites us to be ambitious in a good way. Many of us are ambitious in bad ways, but Jesus invites us to be ambitious in a good way by offering further responsibility for when we've taken up the responsibility he's given us. To each of the faithful servants, he says in verse 21, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things." And he says that to each one of them. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. We often celebrate promotions at work because it is a glory to gain more responsibility. And if it's a glory to gain more responsibility at our regular work here, imagine the glory of gaining further responsibility in the kingdom of heaven. It's unimaginable. And we love it because it's a comment on our competence. It tells us that we are considered worthwhile. It tells us that we're considered worthy. Here the master says to both of the servants, he says, "You've been faithful with a few things, I'll put you in charge of many things." And then later, whoever has will be given more, and they will have an abundance. Greater responsibility is a reward. Now, can you imagine what the church would be like if we were all ambitious in this way? When God commands us to take the gospel to all nations, can you imagine people who are ambitious to do that to the very best of their ability, so that they might take the gospel to more and more and more people? Can you imagine people, when they are commanded to love others as I have loved you, are ambitious in love, who want to take up the responsibilities that they've been given in their family to love their spouse, to love their children, to love their neighbour, and to let God give them more and more people to love and to take care of and to show what God is like? Can you imagine what the church would be like if everybody wanted to be ambitious like that? And if we are faithful with what God has given, then we are likely to gain more and more responsibility. Not just in the life to come, but now as well. We would be putting Jesus' wealth to work, and we would be doing the things that he gave us to do while he is away. But lastly, and perhaps most importantly, the master offers a share in his happiness. He says to his servants, "Come." To each of the faithful servants, he says to them at the end of verse 21 again, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come, share your master's happiness," or your translation might have joy. Come and share in the joy of your master. God's happiness is to be found in doing God's work and in being with him for eternity, starting now. And each one of us wants to live a meaningful life. We want a happy life, but we look for it in all the wrong places. We think if we do what our hearts desire, we think if we do what we want with our time and what we want with our money and what we want with our gifts and our talents, we think that is the path to happiness. And maybe for a time it might seem happy. If you spend all your time doing what you want to do, you might enjoy yourself for a while. But it's meaningless, and you will feel that. you will feel that. You will get bored. If you spend all your money on all the things you've ever wanted, you will get bored of those things. It's meaningless to follow the things that we think will make us happy. Jesus invites us to take his wealth and spend it doing his work. And in that, we will find meaning and happiness. Think over your life. Think of the times where you felt that you were doing something meaningful. Was it when you were doing something simply because it made you happy? Or was it something that you were good at, perhaps, and that you can get better at? When you think about the most meaningful times in your life, are they times when you were doing things just for yourself, or when you were doing things for other people? What is the most meaningful? That is what it means to share in the Master's happiness. It's a glorious and meaningful thing to take responsibility and to do Jesus' work. A lot of our culture, especially for young men, tells them that but a lot of the things that pull them away offer hollow, meaningful things. Take video games and things, for example. It's a way of feeling like your life is worth something, that you're doing something that is worthwhile and meaningful. But God says the only way to share in his happiness is to be about his work. All other things are a lie. And so you might think, well, where can I start? What should I be doing? And if you are thinking that, I'd encourage you to go home today and read the rest of the chapter. The last part of this chapter is all about the sheep and the goats, and Jesus lays out all kinds of things that he says is his work and that he wants us to be about. But to finish, I'd like to talk a little bit about me and my brothers. As Simon mentioned a few of them, I have one called John. He lives in Christchurch and he's a pastor. I have one called Matthew, who's marrying one of your own next month. And Thomas. Thomas is a younger brother, and he is. When we were growing up, he was the most annoying out of all of us. Put it like that. But I want to share with you a little bit about them, just to illustrate some of these points that I've brought up today. And first of all, even though we're all from the same family, those four of us, I do have two other brothers, but they don't know Jesus. So I won't use them in this illustration. But Jesus has invested in each one of us differently. We all have different talents, me and my brothers, and sometimes this was a bad thing. I would look at John and I would be jealous. I would look at Thomas and I would be jealous because they were very good at sports and things when we were growing up. And coming from the south, it's very important that you're good at rugby, otherwise your life is meaningless for a young man. But so I would be jealous of them. But God invested in each one of us differently. We have different skills, different abilities. And in actual fact, that difference has led to some of the most meaningful work in my life when I worked with my brother Thomas. When he, as I said, was one of the most annoying children. But it was because he was so boisterous and full of energy. But when he came up to Auckland and worked with me, it was the best time of my life because he was entirely different to me. But when we worked with kids, it was great because where I can't run around with them very much, and I can't be the kind of person that gets them excited and gets them interested in doing what we're doing, but he can. But if you ask him, he'll tell you that he is terrible at what I'm doing now. He is absolutely terrible at it. In fact, we had his wedding earlier in this year, and he got up to say the groomsman speech, and it was one of the best speeches I've ever heard because it was appalling. He didn't make any notes or anything, which he really needed to do for himself, but he didn't, and it was terrible, but it was very Thomas, and so we loved it. But God has given us different things to work with. Now, does that mean that we will both be treated differently by the Master? No. Thomas must be faithful with what God has given him to do, and I need to be faithful with what God has given me. Because, as I said before, though God has invested in us differently, He's invested in us abundantly. It can be tough for us to remember, but it's important. And because Thomas can be so effective with the kids, it was great to work with him. God invested in him abundantly. And one day, Jesus will come back and settle accounts. And He will ask each of us. I gave Thomas some gifts and talents. I gave Peter other gifts and talents. But He'll ask each of us, what did you do with what I gave you? What did you do with what I gave you? Did you bury it? Or did you use it for my glory? Did you hide it away? Did you refuse to produce any profit for me? Or did you take up the responsibilities that I gave you and do my work? And that is what He's going to ask each one of us. And so I pray that we can all joyfully bring whatever it is we have done with our lives to God, and He can say to each one of us, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things, I will put you in charge of many things. Now come and share in your Master's happiness. Alright, let's pray. God, I thank You that You are kind to us, that You have given us much more than we could ever hope for or deserve. And Lord, I pray that You wouldn't let our hearts grow jealous, that You wouldn't let our hearts grow unkind to one another when we think about our gifts and our talents and our money and our time. But I pray, Lord, that You would help us to serve You with all of our hearts, because You are the great investor. I pray, Lord, that we would be able to see ourselves through Your eyes and know that we are worthwhile. Amen.